when you fight a war, there's battles lost. There's people lost. There are things that you can't ever get back. But when you win, you still overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so that scar on your heart, so to speak, is not there to remind you of the pain. It's there to remind you that God helped you through it.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Common Grounds, the podcast where we have earnest conversations with pastors and ministry leaders in the Christian church. Today, my guest is Tony Alberti, a church marketer and health developer. In this episode, we're going to talk about the differences between purpose and calling, forming new habits, and the logic to a healthy church. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell so you can have notifications every time I upload a new episode. With that being said, let's roll the intro. One more thing, I know that my hair was ridiculous in the episode. I don't know what happened, and also the autofocus is running all weird and stuff, so bear with me. Okay, now let's roll the intro.
The blessings came in waves and could be felt for days. Oh, how my bones still shake at your name.
So it kind of started like this. So me and my wife, we really like coffee, and I've always been a little bit more of a coffee snob than she has been, because I would make pour-overs a lot, and then I had a little hand grinder because I had a bladed grinder for a while, but it was just way too inconsistent, so I was getting tired of it.
Yeah.
And so I bought like a $23 hand grinder on Amazon, and I would be there for like 20 minutes just for a good cup of coffee.
Yeah.
It would take forever. And but it would make a really good cup of pour over though.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't consistent enough because it would take so much time. So it'd be like a Saturday morning thing, and then every other time we were like going to Starbucks. And then I looked in our checking account because I was really curious, and I was like, "Sweetheart, over the past 3 months, guess how much we've spent on Starbucks." How much? $500. $500 in 3 months on Starbucks. We were kind of appalled and disgusted with ourselves. So we started getting a little bit more into coffee and making a little bit more of an upfront investment to get a good cup of coffee every morning.
Yeah.
A lot cheaper in the long run, but...
I need to move closer a little bit.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. So for Christmas, we ended up getting each other 2 different kinds of coffee makers.
Okay.
It worked out, though, because the one that she got me is really good for, like, taking a little bit of time, like Saturday morning kind of coffee, and then one I got her is really good for like every morning kind of coffee. So, and
that's
then,
good.
Yeah, my mother-in-law got us a Burr Grinder, a Breville Burr Grinder, and I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I have a coworker who just, his name's Jonathan, and he is starting to roast his own beans.
Really?
Yeah, he got all the equipment and stuff to start that for his birthday and Christmas, and so, or anniversary and Christmas, one of the two. But yeah, he's starting to do that, and he said his first batch that he did turned out okay, but he's going to learn more. And he's really, like, when I say into coffee, like, out of everybody I know, he's probably the most into coffee.
That's pretty hardcore. Roasting your own beans, that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. And then in the town where I pastor, or the church that I'm on staff at, I shouldn't say that I pastor, I'm on staff at, there's a lady in our church that owns a coffee shop, and she partners with a local roaster in town, and so he roasts the beans, and then they give coffee to the church so we can...
So they donate the coffee to the church?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so it's really cool, and it's really good coffee too, so that's always nice.
Did your friend tell you about the process of roasting and what you needed? Because that's a great idea for next Christmas.
No, but he's just posted pictures in... so a lot of us work abroad, so to speak. The company is founded in St. Louis, and he lives in Kansas City. I live obviously here in Houston, and so a lot of us are all over the place. So the most we see is like pictures, or sometimes we have like Zoom meetings for different like internal meetings or meetings with clients, and so I haven't really talked to him about the process yet, but he's posted pictures and he said it was pretty cool. So
that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where to get unroasted beans from.
Yeah, I don't I don't even know. So, but he's said he's enjoying it. So
I've always wanted to go to like the coffee belt, like in Africa or in South America,
yeah,
and just spend some time in some of those. Like I know that some people are like weirdly into breweries. That's like a whole scene. But I've always wanted to be in like the coffee roasting scene.
Yeah.
But that's not nearly as popular.
no, it's not. But it's a really cool. From what I can tell, it's a really cool process. So, and I like coffee a lot, and they're all really into Blueprint coffee.
This is off brand, so I take it off camera.
They're really into this one roaster named Blueprint Coffee, and apparently it's super good, and I'm gonna buy some. But
Blueprint coffee?
Yeah.
Where's that roasted at?
I think it's in St. Louis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I started like sampling tons of different coffee. Well, I started. I think the first one. Well, we have a local place called Sycamore Grounds that I've done work for before.
Okay.
And their coffee is called a Maya coffee. The coffee that they use, that's the roaster. It's pretty good. And then I got a bag from Trade Coffee. I think it was called 616. And then I'm trying out this Peter McKinnon Golden Hour blend. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And next I'm going to try Black Rifle Coffee Company.
Oh yeah.
I've had people share with me some of their Black Rifle Coffee Company, and I'm like, you don't know how to make coffee, do you?
Yeah. Yeah, learning how to make coffee the right way is a technique in and of
Oh,
itself.
definitely.
And-
You can't just slapdash it.
Yeah.
It's not what we're here to do.
and then have you seen that like coffee subscription box where it's a quarterly box where you can get they ask you about the type of coffee you like, and then they'll send you different
Oh yeah, it's like the
coffees from-
Netflix of
yeah.
coffee. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Trade Coffee.
Yeah.
But before I locked myself into subscription, I wanted to sample a few of their
Okay.
roasters first before I was like,
Yeah.
every so often, just send me a couple
Just
bags.
send me $100 worth of coffee.
Yeah, pretty much. So I guess to start off, kind of give me your background in ministry growing up.
Okay. So I actually moved to Houston when I was 5. So I'm 26. Moved to the Houston area.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Moved to the Houston area when I was 5. And when we moved here, we started going to Humble First Assembly with Milton
gosh.
Poole.
Would they always go, Humble? Did they do that? Did they do it over there?
If they did it, I don't remember.
Okay, good. I knew some people from Humble, and they would do that, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're like the Aggie of Houston. Well, whatever.
And so I started going over there, and I grew up in that church like up until I think I was 19, 20 years old, and doing things over there, involved in the youth group, like heavily involved in kids ministry, youth group, worship team. I learned to play bass, which led me to the worship team, which eventually led me to guitar and leading worship.
That's how it goes, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That's how it goes.
you get on one instrument, and then eventually you learn another, and then they're like, "Can you sing?" And
Like, great, you're perfect.
Yeah, you're perfect. Nobody else can either, so it's okay. And so I started doing that, and then I transitioned out to Dayton First Assembly, where I kind of I helped with the youth group for a little bit, and then the youth pastor transitioned out to a different church.
Dayton, was that a much smaller environment?
Yeah, that's more of like a country community, farm community.
Yeah.
And so what's crazy, though, is it's still on 1960. It's just about 30 minutes down the road, but it's such a vast difference between Humble and that area.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's kind of like culture shock to me because I wasn't used to that environment from a day-to-day aspect. Like my grandparents live in the country, and so I kind of understood the environment more so than somebody who had never been there, but it was still a day-to-day kind of shock. But transitioned out there, worked out there for a little bit. Youth pastor transitioned out. Another youth pastor came in. And then that process was diagnosed with cancer. So they had to step down, and it kind of then fell on my shoulders to kind of take over and run with it.
We'll keep going. I just want to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that. So what was that experience like, and how quickly did that happen?
Well, it was one of those things that I was pretty involved in the leadership anyways. And the guy that was running it, Mike, and I were heavily intertwined in the sense of he really felt I guess calling is an appropriate word to raise me up in a sense and train me and disciple me, because I was a young guy. I wanted to go in ministry.
You were how old at the time?
I was 20.
Okay.
You know, I'd say young. I'm only 26 now, but you know, like
much happens in 6 years.
Yes. In 6 years, I've had 2 kids and got married. So a lot happens,
Yeah.
you know? I actually met my wife at the church. And,
Okay.
And so, no, but it was really interesting because he was really fighting through all of that and trying to make it work and trying to make it happen. But it just, his health got worse and worse, and he just kind of had to step down. And then at that point, because I was single and I wasn't married, or I was dating, but I wasn't married, the board of the church wasn't comfortable with hiring somebody who wasn't married, which is appropriate as a youth pastor, because there's, man, especially in today's age, there's so many situations that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And so with that, they were just kind of like, will you lead it? Will you run it? But you're not, you know, for now, until we can get somebody else in.
So you just kind of got put in the interim.
Yeah. But in that, my wife and I,
How'd you feel about that at the time?
at the time I was super excited.
Oh, okay.
You know, I wasn't upset about it. I wanted to do it. My whole life, I've always been in ministry and loved it. And I remember a very vivid moment when I was 13 years old at youth camp, and I was sitting in the chairs, and the worship leader at the time, Clayton Brooks, actually from the Oaks in Dallas, he was leading the worship for our youth camp in Destin, Florida, who our youth pastor's brother-in-law was running. And so it was kind of complicated, but it was really cool because we went out to Destin, Florida for youth camp.
I like Destin, Florida.
Yeah,
went there
it's
as a
super
kid,
beautiful.
stayed in the beach house, and it was gorgeous. I woke up thinking we were in Wisconsin, because I went to sleep in Alabama, or what's the one state over? It's Alabama, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to sleep in Alabama, and then we were, or maybe early in Florida. And then I woke up, and all of a sudden we were in Florida, but there was like these mounds of white sand that I was all groggy. I was like, I thought we were going to Florida.
Yeah.
And I was not used to seeing that. I was used to Galveston at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just such a big
It's
difference.
so beautiful. And so we were out there, and it was one of the last nights of service, and Clayton just kind of came over the microphone and was like, hey, I don't know if there's any of you out there wrestling with just, you know, giving into God, but just give into him. And in that moment, and then he challenged us to step out. And in that moment, I stepped out, and I just said, you know, God, I want to give everything to you. And in that moment, I felt God just speak into my life about ministry and how he wanted to use me as a pastor. And
what did that feel like to you? I always like to ask people that, because I always like to get kind of a broader mosaic of what it means whenever somebody says like somebody feels like God's speaking to them.
well, to me, it was a kind of like an out-of-body experience, so to speak, of I saw myself preaching, and I saw myself loving people, and I saw myself taking care of people. But I was much older. And so it's kind of weird. And after I saw that, I said, God, what does that mean? And he says, I just want to use you to do these things. And so in that moment, I said, okay. And I asked my youth pastor at the time, how can I saw this, how can I make this happen? And he says,
I'm sorry, real quick. So
Yeah.
whenever that happened, was it like, was it mightily impactful and a huge experience, or was it a little bit more fleeting, like a dream, and you're holding on to it and until you can kind of solidify your thoughts around it?
a mixture of both. Because in the moment it was kind of fleeting, but over the years it's been so impactful, in the sense of when tough situations in life come up and I want to run away, in the sense of, you know, I've had job opportunities to go pursue money and go make things a little bit easier on myself here and now, so to speak. I hang on to that because it's like I can't, because I'm called to something a little bit different than these things. Not that these things over here are bad, but this is what God has asked me to do.
Which we'll definitely get into later, because
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the things I wanted to have you on to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, go. So go ahead.
And so I asked my youth pastor how to do that, and he's like, well, first we gotta, you have to confess that Jesus is Lord, and then believe it in your day-to-day actions. And so let's start there. And so we started there, and then every Thursday the rest of the summer, because we had youth group on Thursdays, and so every Thursday for the rest of the summer I would show up to the church early.
What was that reasoning behind having it on Thursdays?
Well, at the time, before I was in youth group, we had a man by the name of Stephen Nutt as a youth pastor. He's a lead pastor at Creekwood Church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area now. And the youth group was massive. Like, when I say massive, I'm talking like 300 to 500 kids each week. Like, we were sending buses out, bringing kids in. It was really, really big. It was a big deal. And because of that, we couldn't hold it on Wednesday nights with the rest of like missionettes and rural rangers and everything else going on, because they were like competing with each other, because we had one area, like a gym that we would use for the youth and rural rangers, and and so it was for the sake
classic
of
band, choir, orchestra problem.
Yeah. And so it was for the sake of maximizing the capability of the facility.
Oh, okay.
And
So it's not like y'all weren't doing anything Wednesday. Y'all
Yeah.
had to just, add additional days to it. Okay, I got you.
And so, and then Thursday happened, and then, over time, the youth group, with each minister, there's going to be different gifts and different focuses. And Edgar's focus wasn't as much at evangelism outreach in the sense of, big events and things, as Stephen was. Stephen was very, very big on doing a lot of big events, getting people in, getting people saved so we can start the discipleship process. While Edgar was more of do occasional big events, bring people in, and then have a more in-depth, longer discipleship process. And so it was just different ministers doing different things, but both did great. And when we were under Edgar, a lot of good stuff happened. And then so we were on Thursdays, and so during the summer, I would get my mom to drop me off at the church early, like as soon as I could be there, which was 9 when the office is open. And I would ask Edgar questions and have him get me to do stuff. And so I was trying to intern, I was trying to learn, I was trying to do more. And so I had kind of bridged the gap of just being the kid that helped out on Sundays in kids' church to, okay, I want to do this for the rest of my life. How can I do that? And so in doing,
So were your parents? Because the way I grew up is that my dad was usually, when my dad started going to church, he got involved pretty quickly, and that's kind of how my introduction into some ministries got a foothold, and then kind of maintaining that throughout my church career or whatever.
Yeah.
So were your parents involved in any of that process, or have an influence?
Yes. So my dad and mom, obviously brought me to church. And then after, my dad actually passed away when I was 8.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
And so after he passed away, that was like the only healthy thing in our lives at the time, was kind of throwing ourselves into church. And so my mom got really involved in helping with the kids pastors, because we were close to the kids pastors. And so we were helping there, and then doing all of that. And then my mom actually ended up helping with leading the singles ministry at the church and different things like that. And so, yeah, it played a really important role in my foundation in getting into ministry, is my mom's involvement, and kind of seeing her live that out and walk that out and what that looked like. So.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please continue.
But yeah, and so it just kind of led me down a path of pursuing ministry with everything. And I'm a little bit of a workaholic by nature. And so when I want something, like, that's all I think about, that's all I obsess about, that's all I that's just what I want to do. And I'm still the same way. And so I have a hard time kind of hitting the off switch once it's turned on.
Yeah.
And so I have to be very careful, like with my wife and my kids, not to, always bring that stuff home with me and constantly be talking about it. And
So one thing that I got from, so whenever we were kids, my mom would get, she would get into what we would call her cleaning mode.
yeah,
Whenever she had enough of the house being in disarray, she would start cleaning, and we had to start cleaning. And if we stopped cleaning before she was done, she would get very upset with us. And so, funnily enough, I think that's something I kind of got with her. I haven't really but the difference is that I don't expect other people around me to do something. I'm more of like, just stay out of my way till I can get done, till I'm at a satisfactory stopping point. But yeah, I definitely have an issue with that because I'll be trying to do something when my wife needs me, and I'm like, I'm trying to get something done.
and that's actually one great thing about everything that happened at Dayton is. It kind of helped me form an ability to rely on a team. Because whenever we took everything over, the youth room at the time was not very youthy. And so I was like, let's transform this thing. And so we had 2 weeks to completely redo the entire area, like repaint. We built a stage.
Wow.
We put up, I got probably 30 or 40 pallets and broke them down, and we decked out this wall with all the pallet wood.
That's pretty cool.
We put in LED lights, rearranged things. There was like this closet that was supposed to be like a youth office but just junk had piled up in there. So we cleared out all the junk and put it in the attic and, where it was supposed to go. And then cleaned it up, painted it, made one wall a complete chalkboard wall, and made that area into like a coffee room.
Oh, that's cool.
And just so it was a place where when the students got to church, one of the complaints was they weren't supervised and they were just running around causing chaos. And so I was like, well, let's give them a place where they want to hang out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that. And in the
So you gave it that real coffee shop kind of vibe.
Yeah, like people could come in and write their prayer requests with the chalk. We had like the month calendar on the chalkboard wall, so that way we could keep kids up to date with what was going on, and just different things like that. And it was a really cool transformation because the kids weren't expecting it. We just told them that we weren't having youth 1 week, and then 1 week we did an event what we called Water Wars, and we got I think it was 1,000 water balloons, and we had like this bounce house with water, and we did pizza and made it a cool thing.
Yeah.
And then after that we transitioned into the new youth room, and nobody was expecting to come in
cool.
and see this just big transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they really enjoyed it. And then we actually saw, because of it, at the time when Mike stepped down, we were running like 30 to 40 kids a week, and we actually saw probably a doubling of that to where we hit
Wow.
like 60 to 65 kids over the next 2 months. And then at the end of that, I actually stepped down because I became a part of a church plant team.
Oh, okay.
And I became the youth pastor on the church plant team, and we started doing that.
So we're so there's some schools of thought, especially I find this a lot in more of like Catholic circles, but there's the school of thought where the lights and the reliance on the lights and the show of it and updating all of those parts of the church is maybe not as extreme, but still in the same vein as maybe changing some of the explicitly stated morality in the Bible to fit today's standards. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a difference between contextualization and having a moral corruption. And so I'm not saying we're changing standards of the Bible, that the Bible is blatantly drawing lines in the sand. If you do this, this is a sin and it leads to hell. We're not doing that. What we are saying is, in our cultural context, there is a particular way to reach people and make them feel more welcomed when they come in. And if we don't contextualize, if we don't do our due diligence to reach them where they're at, they'll never meet Jesus. And that's the ultimate point. And that's the that's the heart behind why most churches do what they do, is we have to create an atmosphere where somebody who is in the, the deepest, darkest places would come in and feel comfortable enough to hear a gospel message.
Mm-hmm.
And if we aren't contextualizing because, we look like a concert, well, guess what? People are comfortable at concerts. That's why they go to them. And so if we can dim the lights and make it a little bit more intimate, where people aren't ashamed and don't feel like people are out to get them or going to judge them or, anything like that, then they're one step closer to meeting Jesus and accepting him and understanding that Jesus doesn't care where you've been or what you're doing currently. He cares what happens when you encounter him.
Okay. So it would seem to require a certain level of intentionality rather than just, this is how we're going to do it, because this is how everybody does it nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was, I do a lot of, I work with the sound and the video and stuff at this church. So, one of the other guys at this church added me to, it's a group on Facebook, like a church sound and lights group on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, some of the conversations those people have.
Yeah.
Because one of the big contentious things was that somebody posted was that they were, their church started on, I think, Wednesday nights, would start playing secular music before service would started. And, I know everybody has their own views on that, but it was just weird how naturally, one of the comments was, one of the comments was, well, why don't we just start serving beers before service and during service and all that? And I was like, you know what? I replied, I was like, you know what? After a full worship set, a cold beer sounds really good. I probably shouldn't have said that, and it's probably not the right thing to do, but I can't help myself because of some of the things that people argue about. I can't help myself but poke fun at kind of the absurdity of worrying about what somebody else is doing necessarily, or what some other church is doing.
Well, and I think that's the tension we're feeling right now between generations, and the tension we're feeling right now between the context of generations. One generation cares about what they look like. One generation cares about authenticity. And I posted on my Facebook story yesterday, actually.
That's a good way to put it.
It was a quote from Simon Sinek in his new book called The Infinite Game. I'm a huge...
So sorry, a little coffee went down the wrong tube. Okay, Simon Sinek?
Yeah, I love Simon Sinek. His books start with Why, Leaders Eat Last, and then now The Infinite Game. And so he made a comment about how trust is about vulnerability and being honest when you don't want to be. And I just made a comment about his comment of authenticity is our ability to be honest even when we don't want to be, or when we don't want to make ourselves look better, or when we want to make ourselves look better but we choose not to. And so it's really about this one generation is, I was preaching at the church I'm currently on staff at, and I told a story about when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I was in my dad's truck, and we were driving around Houston, and he was working and doing something, and I had to go to the bathroom really bad, and I kept asking, and he's like, when we get there, then finally I ended up peeing myself. And I told this story from the pulpit, and apparently I offended an older lady in our congregation, and to me, that baffles me. Why would you be offended by that? And then I asked my mother-in-law, I said, why would she be offended at that? And she goes, well, you have to understand the generation she comes from. They wouldn't tell their kids when they were pregnant, let alone share a story about when they wet themselves. And when she said that, I said, that makes a lot of sense. It wasn't, and I think that's, broader picture in today's society. What's wrong is we jump to the conclusion, you shouldn't be offended at what I'm saying, instead of asking the question, why are they offended and how can I treat them better so that doesn't happen again? And I think that's that's a thing, because I want to be authentic to who I am and to the purpose God has put me in. And in that, I have to ask those questions and be more sensitive to subjects that I might not find sensitive, because
That's good. That's good. That's why you're in pastoral roles and I'm not.
and but it's one of those things, though, that, you know, I have you can ask my wife, there's 5 or 6 Facebook groups that I'm in that I'll see a post and it just triggers me, and I'm like, you are like, I don't understand why you're being so silly about this.
Yeah.
And you know, and even right now I'm thinking about things that I can't say because you know, who might see this, and it really goes down to is the questions I ask myself is this opinion negatively affecting somebody's chance at seeing Jesus?
Yeah.
Is this opinion negatively affecting the gospel? And is this opinion worth my time to get angry and riled up about and take me away from Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And because it's in James where it talks about how men's anger does not lead them towards righteousness. And so I have to be very careful, because I am the type that I will get a righteous anger if it's something that takes away from the gospel, you know. And right now, my biggest pet peeve in ministry is there's so many people obsessed with these preachers and teachers out there, because they're saying that they can get them to a deeper level of God's power or God's love, but these same preachers and teachers blatantly deny the deity of Jesus. And it's like, you can't, one goes completely against the other. You can't deny the deity of Jesus and draw closer to him.
So for most people involved in the church, and for most believers, at what length of outreach in search of knowledge and a deeper relationship with Christ should we be looking? Because there's a lot of bad information out there, and a lot of really well marketed and hyped information by big preachers and people like that aren't necessarily teaching the Gospels.
I think that, and I speak from a vast personal experience in this, because I had an influence in my life for a long time that even if I questioned it, even if I didn't completely agree with the teaching, I would just let it slip, because it's like, oh, I know his heart. You know, like, that's the excuse we get. Oh, I know their heart. It's okay. Yeah. And I think that part of it is we've done, as a church, we've done a really good job of getting people to the cross, but we haven't done a good job of teaching them how to walk that out. And I say that in the sense of being discipled means you know the Word of God. And because John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst men. So the Word of God is Jesus incarnate. And so if we aren't doing our due diligence to dig deeper in the Word, then we aren't encountering Jesus. And so for me, one of the things I do is, a lot of people say, man, I really encountered Jesus during worship. And so I say, okay, where in the scriptures does your encounter reflect? Where does that, because that's our only anchor. That's our only.
I don't know. I haven't read the Bible since, last week.
and so that's my point, is we cannot say that we are a disciple of Christ if we don't know him through his word. Because his word is sharper than any double-edged sword, separating bone from marrow and soul from spirit. And so it's only the word that separates intentions versus truth. It's only the word that separates actions versus reality. And so we have to make sure that we're getting in the word by reading it, but also using the vast resources that the internet provides, such as commentaries and these things that people who really, really have dug deep in it and know it, and so you can then read what they have to say and put that in context and understanding the context. And that's one of the most important things, in my opinion, is when you're reading the Bible, if you want to know what it says, just put it back in context. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Ask those questions. When you ask those questions, you can blatantly see what either Jesus is trying to say, or Paul's trying to say, or the writers in the Old Testament are trying to say or trying to do, and why it's in there and why it's, one of my favorite things is from the scriptures whenever Jesus is hiding himself from the two disciples as they're walking down the road, and they ask Jesus, have you not heard what happened to Jesus of Nazareth on the cross? And he said, no, I haven't. And they begin to talk to him about it. And then it says, and then Jesus revealed to them all the types and shadows of himself, starting with Moses. And then Jesus walks them through, where Jesus was in the Old Testament, or the story of him and what God wanted to do, and all these different things. And so it's there, but it's up to us to understand him and his true nature enough to where we aren't blown away by these preachers who put ideological thought processes in front of us that we can't do anything with. If what somebody says is so good that, sorry, I'm getting a crackling in my headphone from my phone. Yeah. If all we do is say something that it makes people go, whoa, but it doesn't change their life, we're missing the point. Because when we encounter Jesus, we change.
So a couple of thoughts. I guess the smaller one. How does a church market themselves on a platform, on a social media platform, without overt reliance on the wow factor?
You communicate your why. You communicate what you're doing, your purpose. It's funny that you asked that, because I actually work for a company called Art Speak Creative, and our mission statement is reach people. And so our whole goal in everything we do with the strategic messaging, with your core story and your branding and all of these different things that we do for you, because we help church plants, we help just churches rebrand or rename. We go through this whole in-depth process to, one, we discover who you are. And when we discover who you are, the logo and the color palette and all that, that's secondary. But if we can't communicate who you are through those things, then we're missing the point. And so many churches get it backwards. We try to get a really cool logo and get really cool colors, and then we miscommunicate who we are because we're trying to get the wow factor first. And so it can be a simple Facebook post or Instagram post or tweet or TikTok if you want to, whatever, whatever you want to do, as long as it's communicating a core value of who you are that somebody else can resonate with.
So how different is that for every church? Because I know with like companies, they need to have a mission statement so that they can stay on track to their own company's core values. And I know like the Assembly of God have their core beliefs and everything like that. And but as an individual church, how do you go about, or is it important to go about creating a mission statement type of core value system to your church? And would it even look different from a bunch of other churches, or?
I think it makes or breaks a church. That's my personal belief. I think it makes or breaks a church, because without those core values, what you're going to end up doing is trying to hit a target by shooting in the dark. At least with 5 core values, 10 core values, whatever, you're able to hone in on and focus in on different things that allow people to draw closer in community, draw closer to Jesus. And it looks different for each church. Not all churches are going to have the same core values, because not all people have the same core values. And so that's why the church's core values can't be personality based off of who's in the pulpit. They have to be value based off of what the church is actually doing. And so because there's natural core values and there's strategic core values, in the sense of natural core values are going to be the core values that you're already doing. If you're a missional church, you're already going to be giving to missions. You're already going to be taking missions trips. And so that's not something that you have to preach in the sense of,
Well, how do you know, as a church, how do you know when you're spreading yourself too thin between too many different core values?
well, and that's where the vision statement and mission statement come in, is the core values are really honed in on based off of those things.
Okay.
And so obviously it goes vision, mission, core. And so your core values will be based off of your 10-year vision and mission. And so, and then what you do is or at least what I would do, I shouldn't say what you do like it's matter-of-factly. From the books I've read and the different things I've listened to, what I would do is get a 10-year mission and vision, and then get those core values with those things. And then you break it down. Okay, this is the 10-year ultimate goal. This is what year 7 looks like. This is what year 5 looks like. This is what year 3 looks like. This is what this next year looks like. And so you break down backwards, and then you're able to build up to that.
Okay.
And so, it looks different for each church. I wouldn't, like, if I come into a church and consult them on these things, it's not like I have, like, here's a packet of information, and this is what you're going to do, and here's your core values from now on.
So is that like marketing consulting, or is it deeper than that?
Oh, I think it's deeper than that because, excuse me, it's more about, I would say it's church health consulting. It's more about the health of the church, because you can market all you want to, but if the church isn't healthy, if people can't trust the church, they're going to come in for a service, maybe 2, maybe 3, but ultimately never stick, never connect, and leave. If they can't trust it, because that it's really about, and people make the judgment within like the first 2 minutes of the first worship song if they're going to come back or not.
What do they judge that on? Is it a gut feeling, or is there something that we can quantify there that they judge it on?
I would say it's more of a gut feeling, connection feeling. Because I don't know about you, but I've had the experience where I walked into a church service, and it was my very first time at the church. I didn't know anybody. I was only there because I just wanted to check it out. And I walked in. Nobody said hi to me. I looked new. I had no idea where to go. Like, it was pretty obvious. Like, I was trying to make it obvious that I was new, and I needed somebody to point me in the right direction. And then nobody did. And finally, I went up to the desk, asked the person, hey, what's the deal? Where can I go? Who can I talk to? And she acted like she didn't have time for me. And then I went into the service, and the first song hit, and I could just tell that the worship team was up there to play music, not really because they wanted to worship Jesus, or not really because they were connecting with the church or anything like that.
Was it a big church?
It was actually a smaller church.
Really?
And it was this obligation thing. And so that's the thing, is people want to put big churches in that box, but I've been to Life Church, like Craig Rochelle's church. And the moment I walked in, people are all like, hey, how are you? How are you doing? And then we checked our kids in, and the lead kids person from the kids ministry personally walked me and my wife around and showed us each individual kids room, showed us where we could take our baby if we needed to, and then took us to the coffee bar and made us a coffee how we liked it. Like, just, there's a difference in intentionality when you know your core values and you know what you want to do than churches we've always done it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So I think that the modern church, you're either really, really for vision, mission, core, and you do it really well, or you're really, really away from it and you don't even understand it, and so that's why you don't do it.
Okay.
So those are the only two I've seen. I haven't seen somebody straddle the line. I've seen somebody come from, I've never done that before, because a new pastor came in and was like, oh, we've got to get this set so we can grow, so we can go into the future, so we can change, so we can, evolve into the church God wants us to, so to speak. And then they quickly became that, and the church blew up and grew, and God did great things. And so it's just a matter of, when you know who you are and how God wants to use you, you can more easily be used in that way. But when you don't know who you are and you don't know how God wants to use you, you kind of just stick to what you know do that week in, week out, and there's no real growth. And then eventually, either the church dies or gets absorbed by another church, or new pastor comes in and changes it.
So in the church that you had a bad experience in, what was the age group majority? I'm curious.
It was kind of all over the place, to be honest.
Good mixture.
Yeah, because it wasn't like, there was some older people, there were young married couples, there were some families that had younger kids, teenagers. It was kind of just all over the place. And to me, looking back on it, that really represents how we didn't know who we were or where we wanted to go. When a church is honed in on who they are, the ARC church planting model kind of teaches this a little bit, in the sense of, if you can get the young families into the church, grandma and grandpa will come to church with them. They'll leave their home church to come to church with them if it's close, because they're happy that their kids are in church. And so what you'll see is, if you're doing it the right way and you're doing it that's really glorifying and edifying to God, you'll see this transition of, man, we've had these young families come in, now their parents are coming in, and it's a slow, organic growth. And then if you sprinkle in some marketing on top of that, it will grow even faster.
So how do you reach young families?
To reach young families, man, that's an interesting question. I think you have to have a great kids ministry that not only teaches the Bible, but it's not like an agenda, so to speak. I've seen kids ministry that's it was the kids minister's agenda to teach like apologetics because of like the political climate, and that's not, I don't know, that's not cool. Like, let's just teach kids Jesus, and let's teach them the word. Let's teach them how to live that out. Let's disciple them at an early age, because statistics show that the source of truth that somebody first gets is usually who they go back to whenever they want to weigh other options. And so if we can get to kids with the truth of the gospel and the power of the gospel and encountering Jesus and what that looks like in a day-to-day aspect, then whenever they get to biology and they start talking about the evolutionary process and all of these different things that don't line up with the creation of God, then they'll come back to us and ask us the questions, and we're able to give them information, rather than take the gospel and go back to the biology teacher and ask the biology teacher the question. And I think the way you market to young families is having a safe environment that they're going to be taught how to deal with life issues, because that's the number one reason why, in my opinion, that's the number one reason why people leave the church in the first place, is we don't give genuine answers on how to deal with life issues. I know somebody who's asking me questions like, your soul sold out to God, but why do you still have some of the financial issues you do? Well, they're not financial issues. It's just, I'm struggling right now. That happens in life. Whether you have a 6-figure income or a 2-figure income, that's going to happen in life. Is there's going to be some sort of financial that pops up, and you're going to have to deal with, and you're going to be stressed about. It's just the level of stress that you allow to happen, and if I'm going to give it back over to God or not, and if I'm going to be faithful to Him in the little things. And so, talking through these real life questions and these real issues, I think is a real positive way. And then I also think if you kind of take the Andy Stanley deep and wide approach, where you're talking from the Sunday morning pulpit to the parents about the same subject that you're talking to the kids about, and you can make it a family conversation, I think that it ensures that around the dinner table you're talking about Jesus, and you're, doing
It's a really
those
interesting
things.
idea. Actually, I haven't heard that idea before. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so if you can kind of get the whole church on the same page to move forward, I think that's really, really important.
Definitely.
I'm gonna get some more.
Yeah, man. Top yourself off.
This is a cool.
I love that carafe. It's fantastic. And then going kind of back to the original question, so the other thing that came to my mind was that as far as people seeking out deeper truths and deeper knowledge, and the other thing that kind of came to my mind was actually the late Christopher Hitchens, because I would definitely concede that Christopher Hitchens was a much smarter person than I'll be, probably at least for a long time, I would say. He's a brilliant person, but I still think he was wrong about his religious beliefs and deeply flawed in his thinking. So, but at the same time, I think for somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time and thought about why they believe what they believe, I think it's really hard for someone to accept that someone's smarter than you, but they're still wrong about some of the things that y'all believe at the same time. So, I mean, how do you kind of reconcile that?
I would start with acknowledging in the scriptures where God's ways are not our ways and God's thoughts are not man's thoughts. And so just because you have a man-made wisdom doesn't mean it's a God-made wisdom. And so I would start there in the sense of, if I truly believe in God, I have to understand that even when I am in the scriptures the most, even when I'm meditating on him the most, even when I am praying the most, there's still a sinful nature about me that corrupts and tries to take away from and tries to, because we're actively, fighting that sinful nature every day, in the sense of I'm either choosing God or I'm choosing that. There's really no in between. Like, I'm either going after him or I'm not. And so in actively fighting that and knowing what you believe versus walking that out are two vastly different things. And so I think that it really goes along with, we can justify, yeah, man, this guy was super smart, super intelligent, and he knew a lot, but that does not mean that I have to live any differently or I have to do something differently, because that's the beautiful thing about the scriptures, is it hits us different than a man-made wisdom. It hits us in a sense of, think about the last time you were in the scriptures and you just got convicted about, man, I really shouldn't have had that thought yesterday. I really shouldn't have acted out of compulsion or anger or whatever it is. It hits different than a man thought. It's like the light suddenly came on and this one piece that you were missing just illuminated the whole picture. And so that revelation that we have oftentimes will lead us to a place of, or at least for me, will lead me to a place of understanding God more and being thankful for him more. While a man-made wisdom oftentimes condemns. And at Southwestern, when I was taking Owensby's Bible 101 class, he said a phrase that has stuck with me. He said, conviction educates while condemnation separates. And in conviction, it educates us on the ways of God more and how we are not walking in them, while condemnation makes us pull away or draw away from God, which oftentimes, if you think of man-made wisdom, that's what happens, is we pull away from God or try to figure it out on our own, while when we're convicted in the scriptures or we're convicted in our prayer time or we're convicted in worship or whatever time it is for you, it oftentimes makes us go, God, man, I'm so sorry. Let me have a relationship with you. I repent. Let me draw near to you. And so I think that that's the difference in how you reconcile how somebody can be so smart yet be so wrong, is it really goes back down to God's ways are not ours. And we rectify that by saying God's conviction will educate us so we can draw closer to him, while man-made wisdom condemns us and separates us from him.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. And So one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on was to talk about, you had made a Facebook post, and I thought it kind of, for me, it hit the nail on the head. And it was in reference to, whenever I was in the youth group, I literally had a youth pastor say, "I'm tired of these kids wanting to be doctors and lawyers. Why can't we have some preachers around here?" And which I kind of understand a little bit, but at the same time, I would think that you would want Christians to be out and be lights instead of wanting them to stay within the four walls of the church. And so can you kind of talk about your experiences with that?
Yeah. I can't tell you one youth camp that I didn't go to that didn't have the night where it's like, how many of you felt like you were called into ministry tonight? And like every hand in the place was raised.
Yeah.
You know, and
Same here.
And so I really, not that it's a bad thing to be called into ministry but I feel like what we've done is we've replaced purpose with calling. Because there's a difference in having a purpose from God and fulfilling a purpose than being called to a specific thing or place.
Yeah.
And so because I look at it like this, Paul, for example, was always on the go. He was going. Planted a church, discipled people, raised up leaders, went to the next place, planted a church, right? And then it says he wanted to go to Asia. And he was trying to go to Asia. God told him no. He had a dream, saw a man from Macedonia calling him. So they woke up the next morning and reasoned that they should go to Macedonia. So they go, right? And so I think that when we are fulfilling our purpose, it doesn't matter. I shouldn't say it doesn't matter where we're called to, because it does. But when we're fulfilling our purpose, we'll go to different places in the will of God because we're fulfilling his purpose. And then whenever we're about to go somewhere where he doesn't want us to yet, he'll call us to a different place. And I think that so many times we get wrapped up in, I just don't feel called to that, or I can't tell you how many times that I've run into in ministry where people are like, well, let me just pray and see if I feel called to that. Let me just pray. And it's like, well, are we fulfilling God's purpose of going into the world, making disciples of many, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to live the ways that Jesus has taught us, as a Great Commission states? Mm-hmm. If we're fulfilling that purpose, then why are we asking God to call us to that purpose? And so I don't have an issue with people going into vocational ministry. I have an issue with people going into vocational ministry because it's a good idea at the time.
Right.
And then they go in and then they're like, oh, this wasn't what I thought it was. and so they get burnt out and hurt, and then they leave the church.
But yeah, and the big part of that seems to be like the hype around it, mm-hmm. By people speaking from a pulpit.
Yes, because what we do is we say, where are you called to? And then we fulfill it. You know, we've mixed up that purpose and that calling. Mm-hmm. And I actually have something I wrote down in my notes real quick. Let me just look at it. And so, like, our calling needs to derive from purpose, but oftentimes it derives from an overemphasis on calling, and we try to fit purpose into that calling. And so what we do is we say, my purpose is to preach, or my purpose is to, preach because I feel called to be a preacher. And so we put all of our value in the pulpit, or we put all of our value in our opportunities to preach, or our opportunities to do those things. And so what happens when we don't get those opportunities is we feel devalued, and then we feel burnt out. And so I think that there has to be an emphasis on, if your purpose is for you to disciple people, you can disciple people as a small group leader. You can disciple people as a Sunday school teacher. Mm-hmm. You can disciple people as a choir leader. You don't have to have a specific pulpit or church. And so that's why we have this saturation of pastors, but not enough churches to fill them. And so that's one of the reasons why the church plant movement is taking off the way it is because we have all of these people that want to go be church planters because they feel the need to preach from a pulpit instead of going to their 9 to 5 and disciple people from work. And
which I find odd in this day and age, whenever you can just turn on a camera and create an audience from scratch, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I find that so, and I didn't. That's not something I realized. So church planting is on the rise right now.
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like that's one of the emphasis in most denominations right now is church planting. I know it's big on Doug Clay's heart. I don't know if it's an emphasis in the AG right now, but I know the CMN has taken off like more in the last 5 years than it has in the last 20. And the ARC, that whole church planting network is gigantic. There's church plants that have come out of it. Like, I don't know if you've heard of Hope City here in Houston.
Yeah.
They're an ARC church. There's anyways, I could go on and on. Like, I'm one of the biggest aspects of the company that I work for that we do is church planting, because it's such a big thing on the rise. I'm a former church planter, and I went through the whole like pre-launch, launch. I was there for 2 years after launch, and so it's a really big deal right now. And part of the reason why I feel like it's a big deal is two things. Is one, because preachers have put their purpose in the pulpit. Older preachers have a hard time discipling younger preachers because they look at it, they're trying to take my purpose. And then two, younger preachers see that they don't have a way to fulfill their purpose in the sense of putting it in the pulpit. And so they go make a way for it to happen. And so it's very, that's a little bit more of a harsh opinion and analysis of it. But, and I'm not saying that God's not calling people to it and not doing those things, but even Jesus said, for many are called, but few are chosen. And I think that for specific areas and specific needs, like God has chosen specific people to do those things. Otherwise every person that encountered Jesus would have made a disciple in the sense of the 12, but he didn't. It was a smaller group on purpose. It was a smaller, intimate setting on purpose because they were the specific ones that God had chosen to complete the task of building the church and these different things. And so, it's calling and purpose is an interesting topic, especially in the world nowadays, because we've so oversaturated the word calling that people automatically assume when you're talking about calling, you're talking about purpose. Like, I know for me, my purpose is to spread the gospel wherever I go. That's my purpose. And so if there's a season in my life where I step out of ministry and I go work on a pipeline because that's popular in the area we live in, then so be it. But you can bet your butt that I'm going to be spreading the gospel where I'm
you're
at.
still going to be fulfilling your purpose.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things that I really, really love about the story of Joseph. Is that I think one of the most important takeaways to that story is that I think we get so bogged down in the details when we're faced with choices. We get so bogged down in, is this the right move to make? Is this the right thing that I should do? And I think the story of Joseph gives us the leeway to kind of do whatever, in a sense, do whatever we need to do or do whatever we want. Because there was never a point in all the stuff that happened to him where he wasn't fulfilling his purpose.
Yep.
Wherever he was still Joseph, and he was still a child of God. He was still doing what he was always called to do. And that there was no point, like, obviously things could have gone better for him at certain points of his life, right? But it didn't really matter in what situation he was in.
Well, I think that's the difference between us trying to control our purpose and us just walking in our purpose in a day-to-day aspect and letting the sovereignty of God take hold. And too many people stress so much over God, is this the right thing? I'm going to go on a 40-day fast and do this and do this and do this. And they try to like earn their way into that next step instead of just saying, you know what, faith is blind, and I'm going to take a step of faith out here. And if it's not God's will, guess what? He'll work it out.
Yeah.
He'll make it happen. And because God's will ultimately for me is two things: to love God with everything that I have, and to love people with everything that I have. And if I'm fulfilling those two things, those two commandments that Jesus gave us in the New Testament, if I'm fulfilling those two things, then I'm good, as long as I'm fulfilling those two things wherever I go. And, I think of the rich young ruler. Whenever the rich young ruler encounters Jesus, he says, "Good teacher, how can I have eternal life?" And then Jesus' response is, "Why do you call me good? There's only one good, and that's God." And a lot of people try to say that Jesus is trying to trick the guy or whatever, but it's not about that. Jesus is what he's trying to teach is, if you're calling God, if you understand that God is good and you're calling me good, that means you know that I'm sent from the Father. That means you know I'm the Son of God. You know that I'm the deity. You know that, I'm here for that purpose. And then from there, Jesus talks about his relationship to man. Honor your father and mother, do not commit adultery, don't murder, these things. And the man says, "I've kept all these things since I was young." And then Jesus says, "Okay, but there's one thing you lack. Go and sell all of your possessions and give it to the poor and follow me." See, because that was the one thing that the rich young ruler, that was in between God's lordship in his life and or not, so to speak. And then it says, and he walked away sorrowfully, right? And so I think that that's an important part of the process of purpose, is identifying the one thing that can keep us from that and making sure that that's not what we're pursuing in life. And so for some people, the love of money is an issue. The love of money is an issue. And so God's like, well, let's not go over there because that's going to cause you to fall away from me.
Right.
Some of it is the love of food. And so Jesus is like, well, let's, some of it, and I know that's funny. Some of it's coveting, some of it's stealing, and so Jesus is trying to set us up in such a way to where those things aren't going to rule our life. And so I think that we miss the point of the story of the rich young ruler whenever we only talk about money.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the money, it's about the heart about the money. And in purpose, when we are trying to strive for the, I'm walking in God's purpose and God's happy for me, that really shows that we believe that our contentment in God is based out of our works instead of the complete work of the cross. And so now we're walking in a false gospel. And we have to make sure that we understand that the cross has done all the work for us, and it is the only thing that makes a way for us to encounter God and walk into heaven. And as Hebrews says, we can boldly approach the throne of grace because our consciousness is sprinkled in his blood, because it's his blood who makes a way for us. And so when we're pursuing purpose and we understand that it's him and only him that even allows us to walk in this way, and when he calls us to go away from one thing and walk in another because he's trying to protect us from something, because we're not ready for something, or, whatever it is, we won't ever know. But when we pursue him with passion and pursue his purpose with passion in the day-to-day of fulfilling the Great Commission, then everything else in life will work out. But too many times we get so caught up in the details of, man, is this the right move? Is this the right, I don't think God's going to be mad at you if you're struggling financially and a job opportunity presents itself and you're going to be paid $10,000 more. I don't think that God's going to be upset about that unless God has specifically told you, you can't control money, so let's not do that right now.
Right.
And I think we put too much, especially in ministry, we put this shame over ministers who have nice things. And I'm not talking about like $5 million homes, nice things, but like they drive a nice vehicle, or like they just have a nicer house, and we put this shame on them. And it's like, if they're being good stewards of what God has given them, and they're being faithful to giving and faithful to the mission that God has for them, why are we shaming them? You know, they're completing the gospel. They're doing what God has asked them to. And God said he would provide for people who follow his will. So why are we shaming them? Mm-hmm. And, you know, anyways,
because that's kind of a big thing. And depending on the level of magnitude, of course, there's times whenever I even catch myself like, do they really need that? And what is their responsibility in being such a public figure in all of this as to what they do for a living, in terms of that it's not just a job, it's deeper than that.
Like, are you talking about like the celebrity preacher type, or?
No, not even them. They're a whole other thing. I have other opinions about them, but no, I just mean, with the concept of modesty. Mm-hmm. So you have the concept of modesty in dress, and you also have it in other appearances, like, you know, maybe with what you drive, or maybe with the kind of house you have, or the jewelry that you wear. And so I think there's definitely something to the concept of modesty whenever you are fulfilling roles such as a pastor. I don't know where that lands it, though.
Well, I kind of think about it in the sense of the parable Jesus tells with the man with the 1 talent, 5 talents, and 10 talents. Mm-hmm. And you can't be the pastor that's like, okay, God has given me this, let me bury it and do nothing with it. Mm-hmm. You know, because I don't want people to get offended that I got a new car. Or
right.
Right. But you also can't like go take the 10 talents and then go spend it on whatever you want. Mm-hmm. You know, there has to be a balance and an ebb and flow of, okay, I've taken some of this and I've invested it so I can take care of my family if I'm gone, or if I can take care of my family when, you know, if he calls me to Peru next week, I can then cash all that out. We can sell all of our stuff and go to Peru.
Right.
You know, and then there's also the aspect of God wants us to be good stewards of what he gives us. And I think part of that is taking care of, you know, as James says, true and undefiled religion is taking care of widows and orphans, right? And so I think part of that is, are we being good stewards of our finances in the sense of our personal finances, in the sense of, are we taking care of ministry outside of the church? Or do we just put all that on the church and say that's the church's responsibility? And I'm talking about the church as in the building church, not the church as in the body of Christ. Like, if we're saying that's only, you know, their responsibility, and we're not, you know, when we get the urge to buy somebody's groceries, to buy them, or
right.
You know,
I feel like, and real quick on that point, I feel like there's a lot of Christians who rely on the church the same way some people rely on taxes to take care of certain people.
Yeah.
Like, I gave to the church, I gave my tithes. It's the church's responsibility to go ahead and take care of these people. I did my due. Yeah. And so I feel like there's a little bit of a reliance in that sense on the church building and the church organization.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you see that in their attitudes when you ask them to give more. And, you know, it's a bad practice of a pastor to go in and see how much people are giving. And so, you know, I definitely don't say to do that. But you can tell, you know, by the look on people's faces when you're asking them in the process. As a pastor, when you're standing on the stage and you're looking out into the entire crowd and you say, hey guys, you know, we have this next giving initiative coming up. You know, we would really love for you to partner with us in order to give to this. You can see who's going to give cheerfully and who's not, who's giving begrudgingly and like, oh, I got to give because the church, you know, like whatever the thing is. And it's one of those things that's between them and the Lord. And all we can do as a church, and this kind of goes back to those core values, is in order to help them and grow them in those things, we have to make sure that we have systems and values set up in order to enrich that in them. And that's the church's responsibility in the sense of an organization, is helping them to get to their potential in that. while it's their responsibility to do the work to build off of that potential. And so it's a partnership between the two. I don't think it falls on one or the other. It has to be a partnership. And because if God's given you a gift of teaching on Scripture, you have to teach these things in order for people to grow. They're not going to know what they don't know.
Right.
You know, I didn't know how to divide until I got to, I think it was like 4th or 5th grade when we started learning that back in the day. Now it's like 2nd grade. But and so I didn't know how to divide until they taught me how to divide.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, they're not going to know how to give properly unless you teach them on that. Even, you know, in the church I'm in right now, for a while they were doing a pastor would have his wife come up and do like an offering teaching. And we did it for a while. Everybody was happy with it. And then it started getting into, why are we doing this? Everybody knows how to tithe. Everybody knows how to give. Everybody knows, you know. And so it's one of those things that it has to be a natural core value, because if you push something that's out of core value, that's how people are going to respond every time is, you know, they're going to give that sigh, that frustration. And so with the church and that, I think it's a partnership. It has to be a partnership in everything, in raising kids, in giving, in finances, in health even. You know, these different things, it has to be a partnership in life together. Otherwise, one's going to fail the other and one's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So
I gotcha. And so whenever you're talking about, okay, so it's funny because, you know, speaking of finances, me and my wife, we would watch 90 Day Fiancé every once in a while. And I love that show for some reason. It's just such a train wreck, and I get a kick out of it.
I can't even watch like the trailer for it. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I just get a kick out of it with some kind of vulgar curiosity. I don't know, because I've never been into like reality shows. I just think most of them are pretty trashy. And 90 Day Fiancé is pretty trashy, but it's so funny sometimes watching these people think they could be married after knowing each other for 90 days or so.
It's like that car accident. You can't stop looking.
You can't stop looking.
Yeah.
You can't stop looking. And exactly that. And I think another one was Married at First Sight.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
hilarious. It's just these situations they get themselves into. It's so funny. But anyway, so my wife we would watch that show every once in a while, and my wife would always tell me that a few calls that she heard while listening to the Dave Ramsey show. And I've had conversations with people about, you know, who have listened to Dave Ramsey, and I've listened to him a little bit, and I was like, okay, I kind of, you know, I figure I know what he's about. I know what he's about more or less. And I heard one of these, she was telling me about one of these calls that he had, and, you know, I'm gonna watch a few of his clips on YouTube. I wasn't looking for financial advice. I wanted to hear, with vulgar curiosity, these people's stories, the messes they've gotten themselves into. But there was one thing that he said during one of his calls. He said that he was talking about the money that he's made, you know, and since he started actually reworking everything after his bankruptcy. And I think someone mentioned that, like, he was rich, but he was like, you know, I have wealth, but it's not mine. All of it is God's. I'm just a steward of what God's blessed me with. And I think that hit really home with me, particularly, because I think we get wrapped up in this notion of 10%. I think we get wrapped up in this notion of and I think it's telling whenever we even compartmentalize our walk. Like, okay, this 10% of my life is God's, and then the rest of the 90, I can just kind of do with it what I need to do with it, or what I want to do with it. But I think whenever you start thinking about it as stewardship, like, no, it's all God's, but this, I'm steward over 90%, and then the 10 goes straight back to God. So that was something that really hit home with me in particular, the idea of stewardship, for sure.
Yeah, and we have to be a good steward of what God gives us. And we have to understand that Jesus even said it, in, you know, when you're faithful with little, you know, then God will be faithful with much. And so it's a matter of, right now, one of the things that a conversation me and my wife have had is, my father-in-law, he has a really great job and works shift work, and so he'll work like 4 or 5 days and then have like 4 or 5 days off, and all that stuff, and he has a really great job, gets paid really well, and me, on the other hand, I love my job. I love the culture of the company I work for. I love the culture of the church I work for, but I don't make much money. And it's tough, and we hit financial struggles, and we hit, these different things. But one of the things that I've really been working on over 2019 that I worked on was just being a good steward of what I had, making wise decisions, even if I was going to come up short, even if I was going to, whatever. And so that was something I've been working on, and there were plenty of times where I still came up short, and I still, didn't have enough money or whatever, but God would provide because I was being faithful to being a good steward over what I had. And that's the thing, is God will provide in any situation whenever we're showing that we're being faithful to what he's asked us to do. And I think that's kind of what the point Dave Ramsey's trying to make is, he's wealthy, but it ultimately comes back to God, because even the scriptures say that everything that we have is a gift from God, and it's all God's anyways. Yeah. And so it's a matter of us just saying, okay, God, this is what you've given me to work with, and I'm going to be as faithful as I can be to you with this. And same thing with our giftings. A lot of people, don't think that way about the giftings that God has given them. And so there's people in the church congregation that God has given them a gift of leadership, but they don't use it for God. They just sit in the chairs or sit in the pulpit with their arms crossed, and then they lead people without realizing it in a negative direction that hurts the church. And, I love, whenever I see that, I always love going up to those people and quoting John C. Maxwell, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. When you really break it down, Hitler was a great leader. He just influenced people in the wrong direction. Yeah. And I'll tell them that, and then they kind of look at me. I go, you have a choice to make. You can either influence people towards God or away from him, but you have to choose. And it's the same thing in life. With our giftings, with our finances, with everything, are you being a good steward of what you have? Even if you have a broken down, beat up car, are you being a good steward of it? Are you taking care of it? Are you looking at the fluids? Are you looking at, do you clean it every week? Do you, and this is something that is a big conviction for me, because I haven't always done that. I haven't always taken care of the vehicle God has provided me with. And because I think, we get so quick to think of, man, I worked for this, I did this, it's supposed to serve me. And no, it's not. God provided me with this, and so I need to serve that to the best of my ability because it's from God. Yeah. It's a gift from the Father. And so I think that's one thing that we have to be very, very careful of and take advantage of, in the sense of God is training us to serve in every situation. And we have to take an inventory of how we are serving, and then correct it when we can, and correct it when we're aware of it, and do what we can with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that I know that I've missed out on a lot, especially in terms of taking care of my cars, which, whenever I was younger, I didn't take care of my cars very well. Now that I'm older, I do. And I think that's definitely part of growing up. I think some of that goes to, I think some of it, as far as stewardship and all things and all aspects of your life, goes whenever you start learning to live by principle rather than by a plan. Yeah. Because this also kind of coincides, I believe, with the story of Joseph, is that whenever you're in any situation, as long as you have a core set of principles that you've already thought about and I've already meditated on, that you're going to live by, it becomes very easy to proceed whenever the plan gets all mangled, as it pretty much does all the time. Yeah, definitely. So I think that's a good lesson for young kids to learn, because, man, even when in high school, they're like, "What's your plan? What's your education plan?"
I hated that question in high school.
I was like, I don't have a plan.
I had a plan, I just didn't want to answer. I was like, why is it your business? Leave me alone. And I think that I tell my wife this all the time. I'm like, running yourself is a lot like running an organization. It's a lot like running a business. It's a lot like running a church. You have to have a mission statement, vision statement. You have to have core values. You have to, even in changing your habits. In the book, The Power of Habit, it talks about how Starbucks employees would, like whenever they train them, there's a section in their binder. And I don't know if this is true today, but whenever this book was written, it was. There's a section in their training manual where it's like how to deal with an angry customer, and it's blank because you develop your own plan on how to and then what you do is after you develop that plan, and it's a very detailed step-by-step plan, then you go through this plan with your manager, and you're supposed to role play. And so you can, you can see what's real, what will work, what won't work, different things like that. And so what they see is whenever, because they've role played and they've thought through it beforehand, whenever it happens, they're able to respond the appropriate way. And too many times in life, like you're saying, Joseph had a core set of principles that he lived by before these situations took place, and so he's able to react appropriately. Whenever Potter's wife came on to him, he was like, no, and
Right.
bolted. It wasn't like, maybe. No, it was a firm, I'm gonna get out of here. And
Good for him, by the way. Jeez.
yeah, for real. And too many times in life we react. Or we're reactive instead of being proactive. And in our day-to-day walk, we have to be proactive. Even the night before, if you're wanting to wake up early, it's as simple as making a plan for what happens whenever your phone goes off. I've seen a massive success rate since I've done that okay, my phone's going to go off at 5 a.m. When that happens, I put my phone across the room, so I have to get out of bed. I'm going to get out of bed, I'm going to turn my alarm off, and I'm going to go straight to the bathroom and brush my teeth. And then because that's enough action for me to kind of mentally wake up out of the grogginess. And then after that, I'm going to, start to get ready. I'm going to go sit down, read my book. Then after I read, I'm going to make coffee. After I make coffee, I'm going to have my Bible time. And then it's a step-by-step plan of what my morning's going to look like. And then because of that, I've developed a new habit. Because as the book, The Power of Habit, talks about how when you develop habits, the neural pathways that you develop those habits with stay there. And you can't get rid of them, but what you can do is override them with new habits.
Right.
And so that's what you have to do. You have to sit down and be intentional and write out a plan on how to do this. And so that's why so many people fail, like going to the gym and working out and eating right and doing these different things, is because they're just like, all right, I'm going to do it. And they just try to jump into it cold turkey instead of like methodically
Definitely
getting a plan together and then going and doing it. But then other people use the plan as an excuse not to, I don't have a plan together yet. And so I got to, and so it's a matter of like the balance of things where you just have to do it, but do it with a plan first.
Well, that's definitely something that the military figured out. Because I think it was before World War II, or it might have been before World War I. Most soldiers would intentionally miss their shots. And they figured this out. Like, most people weren't being shot. A lot of people weren't being shot because most soldiers aren't sociopaths who just are fine with just shooting people, which is great. But at the same time, the military figured this out, so they changed the training. Instead of just target practice, they would have silhouettes pop up, and the soldiers, it was their job to reactionarily shoot at the target, and precisely. And so whenever they started training that, the soldiers they basically trained out their moral confliction, and they made it a habit to shoot on target, which is, it's a big problem. and well, because I was watching a video on whether or not, Roman soldiers or, age-old soldiers had PTSD or not. One of the things was, whenever you're fighting a guy with a sword, it's kill or be killed, rather than, I can shoot somebody from, such distance away that
20, 30 yards
may
away.
or may not be a direct danger to myself. And so That's one of the issues why there's such a thing as PTSD, is that you're taking moral conflict out of a decision-making process. One
And
of
then
the
you deal
most
with it later.
right, and then you deal
Yeah.
with it later, which is it's one of the most important moral decision makings, and you're completely removing that, and you're turning it into a habit. And so they've done a really good job at building that into our soldiers, but they have not figured out how to overwrite that in a good enough process. And
Yeah.
that's a really big problem for soldiers. But I say that to say yes, repetition.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing is, I think too many people, when they go to form these new habits and they don't expect to fail. And, and that's a big thing. It's like, no, expect to fail, but grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
Fail forward, so to speak. And okay, so you're on a diet and you're working out, but you had a Hershey bar. Next time, don't figure out what triggered that. Was it an emotional thought?
Right.
Was it, and then watch yourself in that. And it's the same thing with sin habits is, figure out the triggers that kind of led you down that path. Where did you not take your thoughts captive that you should have? Where did, whatever happened? And I know for me in driving, one of my biggest things, my wife always gets on to me about it, is I'm kind of an impatient driver.
Me too.
And so whenever, but what's funny is I try not to break the speed limit. And so I'm good with you, as long as you're going the speed limit. But if you're lower than the speed limit, I'm like, hurry up, come on. But then,
For me, it's the left lane. I don't care
yeah.
what speed you're going, but if you're going slow in the left lane, that triggers me.
well, see, I try not to sit in the left lane unless I'm going to pass. And
Yeah.
so if I'm going to pass, I'll get around, but then I get right back over because I know I'm going the speed limit.
Yeah.
Nobody in the left lane wants you to be going the speed limit. And especially in Texas,
Including
dear
me.
Lord. And my in-laws give me such a hard time about that all the time. But no. And so, that's one of my biggest, flaws is my patience when I'm driving. And so the thing I'm focusing on in 2020 is self-control. And so how I'm trying to go about that is I have to identify the triggers that cause me not to have self-control first.
Yeah.
And then with each trigger, I have to sit down and make a detailed plan on, okay, this is how I deal with this. When this happens, this is what I'm going to do. And this is, and
How far out or back do you go with that? Because I feel like you can really take a trigger all the way down to your eating habits and your exercise habits. You know what I mean?
Well, that's how detailed I'm getting with it. Because self-control starts with discipline. It starts with making the intentional thought to do something the right way.
Yeah.
And so I started with, last week I was in New Mexico for the first week of January. I was in New Mexico skiing with my in-laws and my girls and stuff, and I did not ski very well. I hurt myself, actually. But we were there, and there was a lot of time for self-reflection and just kind of weighing things and making my plan for the year and different things like that. And so in that, I asked myself a couple of pretty hard questions, am I satisfied with my work ethic? Am I satisfied with the output I'm giving to different things like my job?
Well, that's a dangerous question.
Yeah.
I
And,
feel like most of the time you're going to be like, well, if I say yes, then maybe there's something wrong with me.
and it's one of those things that you're only going to get better if you ask those tough questions. And so I asked them, and I was like, no, I'm not satisfied. And then you have to ask the deeper question of, why am I not satisfied? And then you answer, and then why that, and why, and it's the principle of 5 whys. If you can ask yourself why 5 times, you'll get down to a root cause that you can change that will affect all the other things.
Yeah. You keep going to different
yeah.
levels of abstraction.
Yeah, and so for me, it really went down to, it goes back down to my discipline with eating. In all things, it always gets back down to my discipline with eating, because I think through the process of my father passing away and different things, my family picked up a bad habit of emotional eating. And so because of that, when I'm had a stressful day, or when I've, whatever, like I go home and I just want to like just eat. And so now it's, okay, you went home and you had a stressful day, choose to eat good foods and limit yourself. And so I'm still responding the same way, but I'm changing
the reward.
I'm changing the reward. And so I think that's important, is I'm starting small, and you have to start small, otherwise it's not really gonna change. Craig Rochelle's talked about how he changed his eating habit and different things like that. And one of the ways he did that was he started by cutting sodas out of his diet. And so he would allow himself 1 soda a week.
Thank God for LaCroix.
And then, yes.
Or La Croix.
But yeah, I love it.
As the French would say.
And so he cut sodas out of his diet. And then from there, he started cutting dessert out of his diet by only eating like 1 dessert a week. And then he changed the food he consumed during the week. And now he said like he only has maybe 1 cheat meal a month. Like a month. Think of that. Maybe 1 cheat meal. Like, to me, that's unfathomable. But he was like, yeah, it just was a process to get there. And now he works out 6 to 7 days a week. He's eating right all the time. And if you've looked at Craig Rochelle recently, homeboy's jacked now. And
how old are your kids?
2 and 3.
2 and 3.
Well,
okay.
Almost 2 and 3.
Yeah, because like, so I was actually doing keto for a while, and I lost at my heaviest. I think back in summer of 2017, I was probably around 250. I never weighed myself. I was afraid of the scale. Good Lord, I wouldn't have weighed myself back then. But also, I saw a video clip of me. I was like, there's no way that was me. I felt like you could barely see the features in my face. But I started doing keto, I think early or late 2018, early 2019, and I was doing really great. I had lost, I think, 30 pounds. I was down to 220, and then I had a baby who hates to sleep. And which is a problem. The reason why that's a problem for me is because my ultimately bad habit is staying up too late, because I make really stupid food decisions when I stay up too late. Like I will not have a healthy snack. I will go and make a PB&J and have a glass of whole milk, and it's just so it's so hard for me right now, and just because of that, that's my trigger: staying up too late and getting hungry.
Yeah.
So I haven't devised a good plan to counteract that yet. I'm working on it though.
And that was one of the things I noticed in me, is if I stay up past a certain time, I start making decisions like that. And because my wife is super tiny. She's like 5'4" and like 110, 15 pounds. Super little. Has had 2 kids, still super little. And me, on the other hand, she can eat whatever she wants and she's fine. Me, on the other hand, I eat a bag of chips and it's like I gain 10 pounds. And
it's not right. It's not right.
And so, but at the same time, I also lose weight pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And like, so I just started watching.
That's ectomorphs, man.
Yeah.
We can put on weight and take it off, but good Lord, it's usually fat.
It's tough. But so back in September, I was very frustrated with my weight and my health and different things. And so I just started taking kind of that same method approach of start slow. So I started slow. And then over the course between September, October, November, and December, I ended up losing about 30 pounds. And now I'm down, and I'm in the 260s right now.
Great.
And I'm trying to get down to ultimately probably 215. But I know it's going to take time, and that's one of the thought processes that eluded me before, is like instantaneous. I want the microwave results, you know?
Well, that's everybody. That's such a hard, just because, like, I mean, oh my goodness, I hate waiting 2 days for Amazon Prime, and a lot of times it's 1 day.
Yeah,
it's a lot of time, and I just hate it. But I also don't want to go to the grocery store to get something.
And so that, I think that's a context of culture we have to fight, and a trained behavior we have to fight, and growing in that patience. Because if you really, if we took a deeper analysis of culture, 90% of the way the culture is right now is inherently against the fruit of the Spirit. And it causes us to kind of fight that. We have to be intentional in that. And so a lot of that to say, I think that habits, it's just a matter of organizationally, personally, whatever. It's really about the plan and method you put in place and how much effort you want to put towards that. Because if you want to be a high performer, if you want to be somebody who's effective in their life, which that is like my biggest desire, is to be effective. And not just for me, but for the gospel, for the sake of the gospel, then I have to be effective in everything that I'm doing. And in order to do that, I have to assess everything that I'm doing. So it's a lot, but ultimately, it's a good thing. So.
Yeah. And so for me, there's actually a really good part of the culture that's kind of, I mean, for some people it swings too far the other way because of, so the Bible does say a good man will leave an inheritance for his children and his grandchildren. And but it seems to, the bad part of it is there's certain parts of culture that has swung way too far the other way since the 80s, which, I mean, the 80s and the 70s was all about excess. But, to like van life and all that, where you just don't have anything. Yeah. Which, I mean, to be fair, maybe a lot of those people aren't having kids.
Yeah.
But I think, because I watched a documentary by Matt D'Avella, which I really love his YouTube channel. It was called Minimalism. Mm-hmm. And after I watched that, I was like, man, why don't I just throw all, like, because we literally had an entire closet filled with, since we got married, and it was like 2 days later, filled with just junk that we had collected, like things, trinkets that we were never going to use, but I felt bad about throwing them away because somebody had. But then I was like, no, when I get somebody trinkets, like, yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I don't care if they get rid of it. So I think that week I threw away like 8 trash bags full of just junk. And then I think every month after that, there was like another 3 bags every month that I was throwing away. And so I think that's actually probably a good part of the culture that we're coming to is the idea of minimalism. And there's even another guy, I forget his name, another guy on YouTube who deals a lot with like spiritual minimalism, like minimizing the excess and the stuff so that you can focus on the things that are most important. And I view that as probably a better part that's coming back.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that right now we have to be careful though, because in the minimalism, we need to make sure that we're not shifting to a poverty gospel.
Yeah.
Because that's just as harmful as the prosperity gospel.
Definitely.
And so I think we have to be very careful in that. And so in that goes back to the good steward conversation we were having, and making sure that we are contextualizing that, because in each context we're in, it's going to look different. Yeah. And so we have to be minimize the distractions and then also, but with minimizing those things, we have to have an uptick in our intake of what helps us get to Jesus. And so one of the things I'm doing is, the only time I watch TV is with my wife whenever we're watching. Our favorite show right now is The Mentalist, and so we're watching that. So we watch that together, but that's the only time I'm really watching TV. And in that, the other times when I want to watch TV, I make the intentional decision to pick up a book and read a book, because I have like a stack of 45 books on my desk in my office that I need to read. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to get through them. And so I do that. I read it. Anytime I want to watch TV while I'm like at work or whatever, I'm like, just at the thought of it, I pick up a book and I read a chapter, because it's helping me kind of get away from the need to be entertained through visual entertainment. And I'm also growing myself, and I'm also becoming a better pastor and better, leader, or whatever type of book I'm reading at the time. And that really changes your perspective on time that you spend, because even the time where you want to decompress, your decompression time can then turn into education time, can turn into, like, it actually ends up helping you and makes you better. And so ultimately, like, if you want to be even more effective than normal, you kind of get into that habit. So it's like, oh, I'm going to go read this book on the doxology of Jesus, and it's just as great.
Yeah, and what I kind of did, and it's a mixture of stuff. It's probably about 50-50 between education and entertainment. I train, and I did it without realizing, but I trained myself. Anytime I want to watch TV, I start doing chores. Like I'll have like The Office playing in the background, but I'm washing dishes or getting something done. Thank God for AirPods. Most definitely. Oh my goodness. But and that way I can be, even more productive whenever but man, it is so hard to find time 3 hours out of a day to watch The Irishman, which I really want to do. Because I'm a big fan of Scorsese, but geez, 3 hours, that's a big commitment.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, you've seen it?
Yeah, I broke it up though.
You broke it up?
Yeah, I did there's actually I saw a thing on the Facebook for Netflix, and they told you how to break it up.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So it was I think it was 30-minute segments or something like that.
So you just make it into a TV show?
Yeah, basically. And so I just watched it over a period of 4 or 5 days, and it was a good movie. It was really good.
Well, I want to check it out.
I love Joe Pesci, and so
that's the only reason. I love Scorsese, but the reason I want to watch it is because of Joe Pesci.
Yeah, Joe Pesci is good. Al Pacino did a good job. He didn't have his goofy voice. He had his old school, Italian voice, so that was cool. And then De Niro did pretty good, but he definitely wasn't the brightest star in the movie. So.
No, obviously that would have been Joe Pesci.
Man, Joe Pesci. I love Joe Pesci.
I think I still haven't seen Goodfellas. I'll be honest, I haven't seen it yet. I want to watch it.
See, I'm Italian, whether you believe it or not, and
You're not Irish?
I'm not.
You're not a tall Irishman?
Or I'm half Italian, I should say, and so there may be Irish in here from my mom's side, but my dad was full-blood Italian, and so growing up, he was always watching that stuff, and I probably watched some movies I shouldn't have growing up because my dad was like, "Hey, come watch this with me." I saw Lethal Weapon before I turned 8. So in Lethal Weapon 2 and 3 and 4, I saw all of them. And so that's where I first saw Joe Pesci, and he's super funny in that movie. But
my first rated R movie I saw whenever I think I was 5. It was Aliens.
Oh.
I loved that movie. I still love that movie. It's probably one of my favorite all-time favorite movies. And it was funny because I was trying to get the VCR to work whenever I was 6 or something. And my mom, I wouldn't ask my mom for help. I was like, "Mom, can you help me put this movie on?" She was like, "Sure." She goes over, she looks at it. "This movie's rated R. What are you doing watching this movie?" I was like, "Dad lets me watch it all the time." I think I got him in trouble that day.
Probably, yeah. And my mom tried to make sure my dad didn't do that, but he was like, "Yeah, it's okay." So, but yeah, no, and I think with entertainment, I was listening to Gary Vee. I love Gary Vee.
I like to listen to Gary Vee.
And he makes a good point about entertainment and desserts and different things like that, and how they're supposed to be rewards, but we treat them like they're daily, like we deserve them, and so it's a matter of understanding that, yeah, you can have cake, but cake is reserved for that one time at your birthday party, or that not every week, or every time. Ice cream shouldn't be an everyday thing, and so I think that's especially for me, struggling with eating and weight and these different things. It's hard. That is a battle to really push through and think about. Okay, no, this is not a reward I deserve right now. This is not something that I need right now. What I need to do is go do 60 sit-ups or go,
how do you keep yourself from, because I think a conversation I was having with Amanda Wyndham, how do you keep yourself from going too far and putting your value into productivity?
Keeping myself from putting too much value in productivity, or
placing too much of your self-worth in productivity. Because I think that's a dangerous thing that people tend to do also, especially the hustle culture.
Oh yeah. I think it goes back down to your purpose. Why are you doing it? I always start with, that's why I love the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek. It's such a great book. Because when you know your why, it defines your what and your how. And so I think that's really important. And it's also important to understand that your why needs some relaxed time too. And so when I come home from work, Like my daughters need their dad.
Yeah.
My wife needs her husband. And so I've got to understand that it's just as productive being a husband and a father as it is reading books. It's just as productive as working hard. It's just as productive as being in the gym or eating right. Because if I can't, like, especially as a minister, if you cannot lead your home, you don't deserve to lead a church. Like, if you lose your kids in the sake of ministry, like, you deserve to be taken out of your church. Because too many kids end up being hurt in ministry because mom and dad put too much time and emphasis on other people and their kids and not enough time in their own. And that's not okay. And that's one of the biggest things I've run into as a youth pastor, as an associate pastor, is these hurt kids of ministry because mom and dad didn't understand boundaries. And that's just not okay.
What do you mean boundaries?
I think it's okay if you get, like, if somebody's in the hospital and they need you to come, I think it's okay for you to say, yeah, I'll be there in the morning. My daughter has a recital. I think it's okay to say, is it okay if this pastor comes tonight and I can be there first thing in the morning? Like, I think it's okay. Like, it's a human nature thing, in the sense of, my little girl needs me first, and my first and primary responsibility as a minister is to minister to my family.
Yeah.
And if we don't set that boundary, then what happens is we end up losing our kids. And if I lose my kids, what's the point? Because that's why, it would have been better for you to not marry and not have children if that's what you wanted to do when you became a pastor.
Which some people have done.
Yeah, and that's great. Good for them. Good on them, knowing that that's what you wanted to do. And so I don't think one outweighs the other. I just think that when you do have a wife or a husband, if you're a female minister, and you have kids, you have to understand that it's important to set the social boundaries of, my family will always come first, because if I don't serve them properly, I can't serve you properly. And that's something in every interview that I go in for a church or I say that, because if that's going to disqualify me from the job, then that's not a church that I want to work at.
Right.
Because that goes against a personal core value. Because if you're going to call me in on a Saturday, but my daughter has a ballet recital because my 3-year-old loves ballet, and you can't respect the fact that I can't make it to the meeting because I've already told you that I'm going to be at the ballet recital, then that's not a boss I want to work for. And so it's one of those things that making that clear and upfront of who you are is very important. And I think too many times we have this expectation that people of the congregation are going to understand that you're human too. Don't ever expect that, because they won't.
Right. Right.
Because they, especially in older crowds, they think the pastor is there to serve them in every single need that they have. And by older crowds, I mean older school churches, older school thought process, because a lot of newer churches, they have pastoral care and pastoral ministries, and that is dedicated to going to the hospitals and going to the home visits and going, and that's great, because if that's your strength and that's your purpose, go for it. And there's some pastors that use the excuse of, oh, that's just not my strength or strong suit, so they don't do that, and that's not okay either.
Right.
It's one of those things that it goes back to that, like, it has to be a partnership of understanding. And, if I can be there, I'm going to be there, but I'm not going to choose to be there over my family. Because I know a minister who has lost their oldest kid, their oldest daughter, because he continually chose to pursue, while he was a youth pastor, he continually chose to pursue other kids than his own. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah, that's rough. Especially as a kid.
Yeah. Knowing, like, it's your dad's job to be there for students, be there for kids, but he can't take the time for you first. Man, that's rough.
Yeah.
And I never want my kids to say that. I want them to know, like, when Dad came home, he wasn't worried about what so-and-so at the church was saying. He was fully focused on us.
Yeah.
He was fully focused on Mom. And because that is the ultimate legacy of ministry that I want to leave, is that I ministered to my family well, and I took care of my family, which led to me to be able to take care of the church well. Because it goes back to stewardship. If I can't steward the 3 people God has specifically put me in charge of, how can I steward the 100, 200, 300, whatever that God has generally put me in charge of?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's an important thing that our society, especially in evolving church culture, is wrestling with right now, especially with pastors committing suicide and different things like that. Because what it is whenever you, as somebody who struggles with depression, and somebody who has, at times when I was younger, thought of ways to kill myself, I speak from a place of experience in this, is that depression derives from a place of feeling alone. And you can only feel alone when you aren't putting boundaries in your life to make sure you're not. And,
just real quick, what would a few of those kinds of boundaries be?
Intentional time for me, like intentional, bro time. Like, all my time can't just be with my wife and my kids, because there's still a part of me that's a man and needs to be like a goofy guy with guys. And so making sure that I have friends in my life that I can do that with. I have 2 or 3 Snapchat conversations with different friend groups where we just send random memes and videos and all sorts of stuff, to where we can just be goofy, stupid guys. And then we get together, occasionally throughout the month to just get together and talk about life and talk about different issues and be stupid together. That's important. Having a friend group that you can just be stupid with is important, or at least to me, it's important. And then making sure, especially once you have kids, making sure that you are creating intentional time with your spouse for date nights and to feed into each other and love on each other. And, like last night, we were watching The Mentalist, Alexis and I really wasn't in the mood to give her a massage.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. Check your Wi-Fi.
Get out of here. It was Alexa.
Yeah.
And I really wasn't in the mood to like give my wife a shoulder massage or anything like that. I really didn't want to, but she had been cleaning all day and been taking care of our youngest daughter. Has kind of not been feeling well, and so she was taking care of her all day and cleaning all day, and so in my head I was like, it would mean the world to her knowing that I've had a rough day too, to do that. And so I did, and that was an intentional investment to say, hey, I love you and you mean the world to me. And so that's important. And then also making sure that your relationship is healthy and balanced enough to where when you're in the same spot, your spouse does that to you too.
Yeah.
And you can only do that through intentional time. And so intentional time with friends, intentional time with your spouse, intentional time with your kids. One of my Christmas gifts from Ava, she's only 3, but she anytime we pass a movie theater, she goes, Daddy, can we go see a show? Because she knows I love the movies, and she loves the movies. And so for Christmas, my wife got me this, it was from my oldest daughter. It was this really cute picture of us together, framed up real nice, and then a movie gift card so we can go to the movies together as a daddy-daughter date. And just doing things like that with your kids, if you have kids. And then also if you... this video might not be viewed by all Christians, and if it is, great. If it's not, then this one is for them, or not for them, so to speak, because if it's viewed by a Christian, spending time with Jesus, like getting in the Word every single day with the intention of how can I change? How can I be better? or how can I draw closer to Jesus, not how can I be better, because that it's just really important, especially as a Christian and you're dealing with those things and dealing with that struggle of depression, to find Jesus, because the word is always going to reinstate your value, and drawing closer to him is always going to remind you of those things. And so you can fight that. And then my last thing is get counseling. Find a counselor. It's not a bad thing to go to counseling. For the longest time I would think that, and then I went to counseling, and after counseling I was like, man, I feel so much better. And I'm not talking about like pastoral counseling. I'm talking like go to a licensed counselor that can work through that emotional baggage and different things. And
So what is a licensed counselor better at that somebody who's not wouldn't be?
the techniques that they have available to them and that they're trained with are just different than the standard, scriptural encouragement and different things. And because I'd gone to my pastor and talked through things, but it wasn't until, and I'm about to get very, very personal. It wasn't until I went to the licensed counselor that I really understood that the reason why I felt so much weight and guilt from my father's death is because I felt like I had killed my father. And we worked through that together. And I wasn't able to really understand all of that and really release a lot of that until I went through that. And once I did, I was able to kind of combat the lie that was planted in my brain that was causing me to struggle with the depression and the anger and the hatred and all these different things that I was struggling with. And so the tools that person had available were just vastly different than the typical let's sit down and go through a biblical point of view and go through, and not that one's bad, but when you're trained to get to root causes, you're going to be able to get to them better than somebody who's not necessarily.
Yeah.
The pastor's training is really to speak, to preach, to take care of people, and while the counselor is really there to help unpack those things and do that. And so that really helped a lot.
And was it like a specifically like a Christian counselor, or was it just a good counselor that you could find?
Yeah, a good counselor I could find. I've seen Christian counselors. I've seen non-Christian counselors. And so I think for me, the Christian counselor was good. I think the non-Christian counselor brought a perspective I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. Which
helps. Sometimes getting that angle at it from a different filter helps a lot. And so yeah, I would definitely say if you're going to seek counseling for marriage or something, you want to find somebody who has the same belief system that you do, so that way it's going to be good, solid, sound advice.
And whenever, so I know that there's things in the past and hurts that they're always at least a little bit there sometimes with some things. And I think probably one of the problems with, and maybe one of the stigmas about Christians going to counseling, is that counseling is almost embedded with that idea of, this may be a scar that you're always going to have, whereas that contradicts the idea of overcoming in the church.
I'm not going to say my gut reaction. That's silly to me.
Okay.
Because overcoming, when you fight a war, there's battles lost. There's people lost. There are things that you can't ever get back. But when you win, you still overcome. And so that scar on your heart, so to speak, is not there to remind you of the pain. It's there to remind you that God helped you through it. And I think that too many people, because we're our culture has kind of made us natural pessimists because we watch the news all the time and we watch, the political stuff, and it's all like dogging on other people, and this person was murdered, and bad stuff is happening in Iraq, and it's all negative. And so I think that because of that, we have the tendency to naturally assume the worst when we see something. And so we have to have the intent to choose the joy of the victory. At the cross in Hebrews, it says it was the joy set before him that Christ endured the cross. And so in that moment, I'm sure he was not very joyful, yet it was the joy set before him. And so when we look at that pain or that sadness, don't look at it from a lens of, man, I'm so sad that relationship is gone, or I'm so sad that this happened, but look at it and be like, God, thank you so much for what you taught me from that situation. I don't look at some of the harder times I've had in ministry with a viewpoint of, man, I can't believe that pastor would treat me that way, or I can't believe that person would do this. I look at it from, man, God, I learned a lot there. Thank you for teaching me so much, and thank you for the good that I learned, because it's helped me become the minister that you want me to be. And when we view things like that, it's easier to defend against the enemy coming in and trying to stir stuff up again. But when we look at it like, oh, that scar's there and I wish it would just go away because it means I didn't win or I didn't overcome, or that's really a foundation of, it goes back to that works gospel, that it's only by me that it happened instead of by Christ. So, yeah.